GoldenEye 007 is a first-person shooter video game developed by Rare and based on the 1995 James Bond film GoldenEye. It was exclusively released for the Nintendo 64 video game console in August 1997. The game features a single-player campaign in which players assume the role of British Secret Intelligence Service agent James Bond as he fights to prevent a criminal syndicate from using a satellite weapon against London to cause a global financial meltdown. The game also includes a split-screen multiplayer mode in which 2, 3, or 4 players can compete in different types of deathmatch games. GoldenEye 007 was originally conceived as an on-rails shooter inspired by Sega's Virtua Cop, before being redesigned as a free-roaming shooter. The game was highly acclaimed by the gaming media and has sold over 8 million copies worldwide, making it the third best-selling Nintendo 64 game. GoldenEye 007 is considered an important game in the history of first-person shooters for demonstrating the viability of game consoles as platforms for the genre, and for signaling a transition from the then-standard Doom-like approach to a more realistic style. It pioneered features such as atmospheric single-player missions, stealth elements, and the incorporation of a console multiplayer deathmatch mode. GoldenEye 007 was followed by a spiritual successor, Perfect Dark, also developed by Rare for the Nintendo 64. A reimagining of the game, also titled GoldenEye 007, was published by Activision and released for the Wii and Nintendo DS in 2010, and later re-released as GoldenEye 007 Reloaded for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 the following year. Gameplay: GoldenEye 007 is a first-person shooter that features both single and multiplayer modes. In the single-player mode, the player takes the role of James Bond through a series of free-roaming 3D levels. Each level requires the player to complete a certain set of objectives, such as collecting or destroying specified items, rescuing hostages, or meeting with friendly non-player characters, and then exit the stage. Some gadgets from the James Bond film series are featured in the game, and are often used to complete particular mission objectives. For example, in one level the electromagnetic watch from Live and Let Die is used to acquire a jail cell key. The arsenal of weapons includes pistols, submachine guns, assault rifles, grenades, and throwing knives, among others. Guns have a finite magazine and must be reloaded after a certain number of shots, but the player may acquire and carry as many weapons as can be found in each mission. The player's initial weapon in most missions is James Bond's Walther PPK, called the PP7 in-game. Most of the game's firearms are modeled on real-life counterparts, while others are based on fictitious devices featured in the Bond films, such as the Golden Gun and Moonraker laser. The weapons vary in characteristics such as rate of fire, degree of penetration, and type of ammunition used, and inflict different levels of damage depending on which body part they hit. Stealth is a significant element of the gameplay. Gunfire with loud assault weapons can alert distant guards, and activated alarms can trigger infinitely respawning enemies. Therefore, to avoid gunfights with numerous opponents, it is advantageous to eliminate soldiers and security cameras before they spot or hear the player. Certain weapons incorporate suppressor or telescopic sight attachments to aid the player in killing enemies discreetly. There are no health recovery items in the game, although armor vests can be acquired to provide a secondary health bar. 4 save files are available to track the player's progress through the game's 20 missions, each of which may be played on Agent, Secret Agent, or OO Agent difficulty settings. Higher difficulties increase the challenge by altering factors such as the damage enemies can withstand and inflict. the amount of ammunition available, and the number of objectives that must be completed. Once a mission is completed, the player may either continue progressing through the story or choose to replay a previously completed level. Completing certain missions within particular target times enables the player to unlock bonus cheat options which make various changes to the gameplay. Upon fully completing the game on the hardest difficulty setting, an additional 007 mode is unlocked that allows the player to customize the challenge of any mission by manually adjusting enemies' health, reaction times, aiming accuracy, and the damage they inflict. The multiplayer mode allows 2, 3, or 4 players to compete against each other in 5 different types of split-screen deathmatch games. Normal, You Only Live Twice, The Living Daylights, The Man with the Golden Guns, and License to Kill. Normal is a basic deathmatch mode in which the main objective is to kill opponents as many times as possible. It can be played as a free-for-all game or in teams. In You Only Live Twice, players only have 2 lives before they are eliminated from the game, and License to Kill is a mode in which players die from a single hit with any weapon. In The Man with the Golden Guns, a single golden gun, which is capable of killing opponents with only 1 shot, is placed in a fixed location on the map. Once the golden gun is picked up, the only way to reacquire it is to kill the player holding it. The player with the golden gun is unable to pick up body armor while opponents can. In The Living Daylights, a flag is placed in a fixed location on the map, and the player who holds it the longest wins. The flag carrier cannot use weapons but can still collect them to keep opponents from stocking ammunition. Aspects of each game type can be customized, including the chosen map, class of weapons, and winning condition. As players progress through the single-player mode, new maps and characters are unlocked in the multiplayer mode. Plot: GoldenEye 007 closely follows the plot of the movie, though with some minor alterations. The game starts in Archangel, in the Soviet Union in 1986, where MI6 has uncovered a secret chemical weapons facility at the Bielomori Dam. James Bond and fellow 00 agent Alec Trevelyan are sent to infiltrate the facility and plant explosive charges. During the mission, Trevelyan is apparently killed by Colonel Arkady Ourumov, but Bond escapes by commandeering an aeroplane. 5 years later in 1991, Bond is sent to investigate a satellite control station in Severnaya, Russia, where programmers Natalia Simonova and Boris Grishenko work. 2 years after the Severnaya mission, in 1993, Bond investigates an unscheduled test firing of a missile in Kyrgyzstan, believed to be a cover for the launch of a satellite known as GoldenEye. This space-based weapon works by firing a concentrated electromagnetic pulse at any Earth target to disable any electrical circuit within range. As Bond leaves the silo, he is ambushed by Ourumov and a squad of Russian troops. Ourumov manages to escape during the encounter. The remainder of the game takes place in 1995. Bond visits Monte Carlo to investigate the frigate Lafayette, where he rescues several hostages and plants a tracker bug on the Eurocopter Tiger helicopter before it is stolen by the Janus crime syndicate. Bond is then sent a second time to Severnaya, but during the mission he is captured and locked up in the bunker's cells along with Natalia Simonova, who has been betrayed to Janus. The two escape the complex seconds before it is destroyed, on the orders of Ourumov, by the GoldenEye satellite's EMP. Bond next travels to St. Petersburg, where he arranges with ex-KGB agent Valentin Zhukovsky to meet the chief of the Janus organization. This is revealed to be Alec Trevelyan. His execution by Ourumov in the Archangel facility was faked. Bond and Natalia escape from Trevelyan, but are arrested by the Russian police and taken to the military archives for interrogation. Bond eventually manages to escape the interrogation room, rescue Natalia, and communicate with Defense Minister Dmitry Mishkin, who has verified Bond's claim of Ourumov's treachery. Natalia is recaptured by General Ourumov, and Bond gives chase through the streets of St. Petersburg, eventually reaching an arms depot used by Janus. There Bond destroys its weaponry stores and then hitches a ride on Trevelyan's ex-Soviet missile train, where he kills Ourumov and rescues Natalia. However, Alec Trevelyan and his ally Xenia on a top escape to their secret base in Cuba. Natalia accompanies Bond to the Caribbean. Surveying the Cuban jungle aerially, their light aircraft is shot down. Unscathed, Bond and Natalia perform a ground search of the area's heavily guarded jungle terrain, but are ambushed by Xenia, who is quickly killed by Bond. Bond sneaks Natalia into the control center to disrupt transmissions to the GoldenEye satellite and force it to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. He then follows the fleeing Trevelyan through a series of flooded caverns, eventually arriving at the antenna of the control center's radio telescope. Trevelyan attempts to realign it in a final attempt to restore contact with the GoldenEye, but Bond ultimately destroys machinery vital to controlling the antenna and defeats Trevelyan in a gunfight on a platform above the dish. Development: GoldenEye.It was developed by an inexperienced team. 8 of its 10 developers had never previously worked on video games. As programmer David Doak recalls, "Looking back, there are things I'd be wary of attempting now, but as none of the people working on the code, graphics, and game design had worked on a game before, there was this joyful naivete, due to the success of Donkey Kong Country." GoldenEye.It was originally suggested as a 2D side-scrolling platformer for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, but Martin Hollis, the director and producer of the game, proposed a 3D shooting game for Nintendo's in-development Ultra 64 console. The intention for the first few months of development was for the game to be an on-rails shooter similar to Sega's light gun game Virtua Cop. GoldenEye's gas plant location was modeled by Carl Hilton with a predetermined path in mind, although GoldenEye is controlled with a pad rather than a light gun. Hollis credited Virtua Cop as an influence on the developer's adoption of features such as gun reloading, position-dependent hit reaction animations, penalties for killing innocent characters, and an alternative aiming system that is activated upon pressing the R button of the Nintendo 64 controller. The development team visited the studios of the GoldenEye film to collect photographs and blueprints of the sets used in the movie. Silicon Graphics Onyx workstations and Nintendo's NINGEN development software were used to create the geometry for virtual environments based on this reference material. However, many of the missions were extended or modified to allow the player to participate in sequences which the film's James Bond did not. Hilton explained, "We tried to stick to the reference material for authenticity, but we weren't afraid of adding to it to help the game design. It was very organic, initially. The designer's priority was purely on the creation of interesting spaces, level design and balance considerations such as the placement of start and exit points. Characters and objectives did not begin until this process was complete." According to Martin Hollis, the benefit of this sloppy, unplanned approach was that many of the levels in the game have a realistic and non-linear feel. There are rooms with no direct relevance to the level. There are multiple routes across the level. Hollis also noted that the concept of several varied objectives within each mission was inspired by the multiple tasks in each stage of Super Mario 64, a game in whose 3D collision detection system was also influential for Hollis. Final Nintendo 64 specifications and development workstations were not initially available to Rare. A modified Sega Saturn controller was used for some early playtesting, and the developers had to estimate what the finalized console's capabilities would be. The final Nintendo 64 hardware could render polygons faster than the SGI Onyx workstations they had been using. but the game's textures had to be cut down by half. Carl Hilton explained one method of improving the game's performance. A lot of GoldenEye is in black and white. RGB color textures cost a lot more in terms of processing power. You could do double the resolution if you use grayscale, so a lot was done like that. If I needed a bit of color, I'd add it in the vertex. At one time, developers planned to implement the reloading of the weapons by the player unplugging and reinserting the rumble pack on the Nintendo 64 controller, though this idea was discarded at Nintendo's behest. GoldenEye 007 introduced stealth elements not seen in previous first-person shooter games. Doak explained how this was implemented. Whenever you fired a gun, it had a radius test and alerted the non-player characters within that radius. If you fired the same gun again within a certain amount of time, it did a larger radius test, and I think there was a third even larger radius after that. It meant if you found one guy and shot him in the head and then didn't fire again, the timer would reset. Windows throughout the game were programmed so that enemies cannot see through them while the player can. Though decidedly unrealistic, this was an intentional feature made to encourage the player to use Windows to covertly spy on enemies. Rather than trying to release the game in tandem with the movie, the Stamper brothers made sure to give the developers as much time as they needed. It was developed through 2.5 years, the first year of which was spent developing the engine and producing art assets. The game's multiplayer mode was added late in the development process. Martin Hollett described it as a complete afterthought. According to David Doak, the majority of the work on the multiplayer mode was done by Steve Ellis, who sat in a room with all the code written for a single-player game and turned GoldenEye into a multiplayer game. GoldenEye 007 was released on 25 August 1997, nearly 2 years after the film. The game's cartridge size was 96 megabytes. Additionally, every cartridge of the game contains a fully functional ZX Spectrum emulator with 10 Rare-developed games. This function was originally made as an experimental side project by Rare staff and was deactivated in the final build of the game, but has since been unlocked through fan-developed patches. In addition to the Nintendo 64 game, a racing version was in development for the Virtual Boy, but was ultimately cancelled before release.